includes a study of the development of strategic human rights litigation and its democratic role. She's currently working on Australian Research Council funded project on community sponsorship for refugees. Next, we have Kwami Abdul-Bey. Kwami is an alumnus of the Clinton School, we're happy to say, and is co-founder, co-convener of the Arkansas Peace and Justice Memorial Movement, which was the target of the subject matter of our paper together. Kwame is also a very prominent activist in the area of transitional justice, addressing racial injustice in the Southern United States. And Dr. Eric Wiebelhaus-Brahm is my former colleague within the University of Arkansas system. He's now professor of genocide and mass atrocity prevention at Binghamton University in New York. He's the author of 3 books and over 40 articles and book chapters. His newest book with Ellen Scarr and Jemima Garcia Godos is Exploring Truth Commission Recommendations in a Comparative Perspective Beyond Words, published with Intersection Uitgevers in 2022. And let's see, and then Professor Lin Sun. Dr. Lin Sun is assistant professor of gender studies and African American studies in the Center for American Studies, School of English Studies, Shanghai International Studies University in China. She was a visiting scholar at McMaster University from February 2023 to February 2024. Her research and teaching focuses on motherhood studies, African American studies, and intersectionality. Her recent work has appeared in the Routledge Companion to Intersectionalities, and her current scholarly interest centers on comparative studies between Chinese and Western culture. And what we'll do is we'll have 3 overviews of the presentations. Then we'll have time for a question and answer at the end. We'll hear questions from you, and the authors and presenters may ask questions of each other. So we'll begin by hearing from Professor Kate Ott.
Thanks so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I got a nod. Thanks, Toya. Excellent. Look, it's lovely to be part of the workshop, and I'm so sorry that I can't join you in Hamilton. I have been to Hamilton, and I really enjoyed my time there. But yes, it's just in the middle of school semester and everything for my son, so traveling to Canada was not possible. So today I'm presenting research that I've done with Ron Levy, who presented yesterday, and Henry Parmalee, who is our wonderful ANU student who helped us do research for this paper. And the research that he did was just of such a high level that we brought him in as an author. So the title of the article is Mini Public Adjudication of Human Rights Disputes and Empirical Evaluation. It's just been published in the Federal Law Review, and I believe it is open access. So just a bit of a background and context, and perhaps even a bit of a confession. I'm not a deliberative Democrat. I don't really have a background in deliberative democracy, and I have been in the past perhaps a little bit of a cynic. So my area is international refugee law. So as part of that, I'm dealing, obviously you would know Australia's policies on refugees are globally infamous, but I've worked in Australia and other parts of the world where you've got pretty inhumane policies of externalization, immigration, detention, encampment. And the only site, forum where we've seen any victory on behalf of refugees and refugee rights is through the court. So I guess I was a little bit cynical of any type of forum that sidelined or undermined, I should say, the role of court. So the way I came to this research was during COVID-19. I found and obviously COVID-19, there was a lot of contentious human rights issues. So lockdown, for example, the rights of freedom of movement against people to personal health, Again, the closure of schools, so the right of children to education, and that having to be weighed against rights of teachers and rights to their health as well. Australia also too, I don't know if you're aware, had a pretty extreme policy of locking its own citizens out of the country. So we had Australian citizens who couldn't return to Australia for sometimes months and sometimes actually years. And so I was contacted a lot by the media just to provide human rights perspective on various various COVID policies. And what I found was a pretty very low levels of human rights literacy in Australia, which in one way isn't surprising. We don't have a federal Bill of Rights or a federal Human Rights Act. We don't have many human rights embedded in our constitution. And so I think a lot of the understanding of human rights in Australia was the approach was very much absolutist. Well, I have a right to freedom of movement and therefore I don't have to be locked down. Or I have a right to bodily integrity and therefore I don't have to get vaccinated. So I think there was a real need for human rights education, and in particular, the concept of proportionality in human rights law. So in the media and in the public more generally. So what we wanted to do as part of this research was to look at the potential for deliberative democracy fora, so that could be citizens' assemblies, mini publics, deliberative polling, looking at whether there's potential for that fora to deal with what we call rights disputes. So we were aware that there were many publics that we had been used in the past to consider whether a jurisdiction should enact a new law, a new human rights law. For example, should we insert a new provision in the Constitution? Should this country adopt a Human Rights Act, for example? But what we really want to look at, so rights adjudicative, deliberative mini publics is what we were looking for. So whether deliberative mini publics had really been used to address complex and contentious human rights issues where people have competing interests and competing human rights claims. We were aware that these types of rights adjudicative deliberative mini publics had been proposed from theoretical perspectives. So Adam Gestel, for example, we cite in the paper, and Horatio Spector have proposed such human rights deliberative mini publics. And so the contribution this paper really makes is moving from the theoretical to the empirical. So we looked globally and we wanted to identify any mini publics which were convened to adjudicate rights disputes. And as part of that research, we identified 19 deliberative mini publics, so rights adjudicative mini publics across 10 countries. So there's countries where Australia, Canada, Finland, France, Germany, Ireland, Aotearoa, New Zealand, North Macedonia, the UK, and the US. So some of these deliberative mini publics are looking at contentious human rights issues were explicitly directed to consider rights issues as the main object of their deliberation, but others weren't so instructed, but nevertheless they chose to do this. And the more implicit consideration of rights was common in deliberative mini publics convened during the COVID-19 pandemic to address COVID-19 policy. So we took these 19 rights adjudicative deliberative mini publics, and just to be clear, we were just looking at publicly available information of the mini publics. I mean, many of them were convened, a few years before we did the research, so we certainly weren't in the position to attend and observe. Though in some instances, especially where there wasn't a lot of publicly available information about the mini public, how it was run, we did contact the organisers, and just a thank you to those who did provide some information that hadn't been published online, to give us a bit of an insight about how the deliberative mini public was run. So we did a two-part analysis, and the first was to assess whether rights adjudicative mini publics have adopted the main institutional hallmarks of design, deliberative democratic design, so random selection, stratification, exposure, facilitated deliberation. And our conclusion was overwhelmingly they did. But the second, and this is the more sort of meaty part of the analysis, we were looking at whether these mini publics conformed with two of the most ubiquitous markers of legal human rights analysis. So this is the general doctrines of proportionality, which I assume you'll be familiar with. I'm not going to give you a specific proportionality test because they all differ in different jurisdictions, but I think they are roughly the same. So the general doctrine of proportionality, and also general doctrines of non-discrimination. We were also looking at whether these adjudicative human rights deliberative bodies were looking at specific human rights law tests, for example, freedom of movement. So if you look at freedom of movement in the ICCPR, for example, there is a very specific proportionality test for the right of freedom of movement. So those were the questions we were asking. Sorry, I'm just checking on the time. I've got about another 10 minutes to go. Only a handful of these deliberative mini publics undertook deliberations consistent with legal forms of rights reasoning. And notably, so this was a really important part of our findings, were that these deliberative democracy bodies were the ones that reached the most productive outcome. So I think this was the most significant part of our finding, was that legal human rights analysis, so for example, proportionality tests, can be effectively used, have been used, first of all, empirically have been used in deliberative democratic fora. And when they are used, the participants are more likely to reach productive outcomes. Now, I'll speak a little bit in a moment about the fact that they often weren't technical legal tests that were given to the participants. Instead, they were more general tests, but I'll speak about that a little bit more in a minute. So just to give you an example, there were two deliberative mini publics that really stood out to us as equipped with proportionality-oriented reasoning tools. And the first was actually the Australian example we had. This was the New South Wales COVID Safe app deliberation workshop. So this was one, I don't know if you remember from COVID, but the idea that you would have an app on your phone that would log where you had been. If you'd been to a cafe earlier that morning, for example, or a grocery store, and then if you were later diagnosed with COVID, you were, that app was able to trace where you had been and alert people who had been in the same vicinity at around about the same time that they may have been exposed to COVID. These apps, I think, were brought in probably within the first year of the pandemic, and I think were used in particular before vaccines were available. So The mandate of the deliberative workshop specifically prompted participants to engage in a rights balancing exercise. So participants were asked whether the legislation that enabled the COVID Safe app, so you've got participants specifically dealing with legislation, whether that legislation went too far in protecting individuals' personal and privacy rights. So the idea that the app was tracking where people had been, and then government actors were had that information available to them, or whether it did not go far enough. That was the question that was put to the participants. The participants saw video recordings from experts, had live question and answer sessions with them. None of the, and this is going to the point I raised earlier, none of the experts actually had a formal legal background, but the participants were guided by proportionality principles. So the participants were told privacy was not an absolute right, but that any interference must be on the basis of law, aiming to achieve a legitimate objective. So that's, that is an example of, that is the proportionality test in a nutshell. And the result of the workshops was that more than 2/3 of the participants supported the balance between privacy protection and potential public health benefit that was enacted through the COVID Safe app that they were analysing. The participants undertook a minimal impairment analysis, so identifying the policies that would have been the least restrictive of rights. And they did that in relation to the public health protection outcomes. So some of the factors considered by the participants in the assessment of this policy were voluntariness, that the app traits proximity as opposed to specific locations, that the data was only available to government officials performing contact tracing, and that the person's data would be wiped after they deleted the app from their phone. So when you think about it, the participants were asked to deal with both legal tests, and also issues that an adjudicative decision maker, such as the judge, a tribunal member, would have been asked to address if this matter was ever litigated. Similarly, the other one I'll speak to is the Canadian Assembly on Democratic Expression, which really took a highly informed approach to the political rights considered. So the Assembly was tasked with generating recommendations on internet regulation to prevent hate speech, misinformation, and online harassment. And they identified suitable, so their task was to identify suitable limits on freedom of speech. The Assembly recommended tailored regulations to create enhanced protection for online data of minors, and the documents indicate that the Assembly's reflections included legal proportionality tests and concepts such as minimal impairment. In contrast, deliberative mini publics that took that absolutist approach to rights and weren't informed by concepts such as proportionality, minimal impairment, they were the mini publics where the participants just got stuck and couldn't make a recommendation. So, for example, in France and North Macedonia, they held deliberative mini publics on vaccine mandates. And basically, they had no instructions from legal experts or other experts about, approaches to proportionality. And the conclusion of the mini publics were just not very useful. Essentially, the participants said, well, we have a right to health, but we also have a right to bodily integrity. Those rights sort of cancel each other out. So they couldn't come to any conclusive recommendation on whether a mandatory vaccination policy was appropriate or legitimate. Sorry, I'm just checking on the time. So interestingly, there were also some mini publics that really adopted non-discrimination. and non-discrimination and also intersectionality, concepts of intersectionality. For example, there was a New York deliberative mini public on the release of vaccines. So it was on vaccine access. So this was at a time in COVID where there were only sort of limited amounts of the vaccine available. So a mini public was adjourned to discuss, well, who should have priority access to those vaccinations. And I think the those deliberations really had quite a sophisticated understanding of relevant risk factors of COVID-19. Sorry, I should say that another aspect of these deliberations that we were really wanting to look at is whether they could, the participants were able to understand and analyze quite sophisticated scientific technical information as well. And the conclusion we came to was that we could. I've got a 5-minute remaining message, but that was probably from a little while ago. But yes, I think importantly in this New York deliberation, it was really evident that the participants really had a good grasp of intersectionality. So look, I'm going to stop there and talk about, I think, some of the newer issues for research that I'm really interested in. So I started off by saying, look, I don't have a background in deliberative democracy. I may have been converted through this research, and I'm really interested in whether we could use deliberative forums to address the polarization we're seeing in so many parts of the world with respect to refugee policy. And I've thank you to Henry Pumley, who did some wonderful research on this for me. There's been 2 specific deliberative citizens' assemblies being conducted in Europe on refugee law and policy. I don't think they came to particularly helpful outcomes, but there've certainly been calls for these types of initiatives. I've just come from the main Australian Refugee Law and Policy Conference that's held nationally, and it's very clear that we have just reached such a point of both polarization, but also a disengaged middle. And, you know, we have been using litigious strategies in Australia for decades now, about 2 decades, and it's very clear that they only have half victories and a lot of them result in political backlash. So that's an issue that I'm hoping to explore. There were some parliamentarians in attendance at the conference yesterday who were really quite excited about those ideas. So that's where I'd really like to take the conversation. If anyone has ideas about that, I'd be really really appreciative. So I think that's my 20 minutes, if that's correct. So I'll end there now.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Well, again, my name is Rob Richards. I'm also a panel member of for the paper entitled Dialogue and Memory: the Position between local transitional justice work of the Arkansas Peace Justice and Moral Movement. I think Josiah had a slide up a little while ago that talked about full participation of ordinary citizens and of community-based groups in our normative work, and that this project is an example of that. So a partnership between the Arkansas Peace and Justice and Moral Movement and our other institutions to try to further this work of transitional justice applied to the area of racial injustice in the United States. And I'll introduce my co-panelists. So I just wanted to begin by, next slide, please. By thanking Bonnie and Melissa and Paul and Jesse, and also our deans, Victoria DeFrancesco Soto and Dean Megan Jordan, who have been very supportive of this work. Next slide, please. So the Arkansas Peace, Justice, Memorial Movement is an affiliate of the Equal Justice Initiative, Brian Stevenson's organization in Alabama, which promotes constructive memory work in the community to try to encourage residents of the U.S. to confront the racial past, the history of violence, of racial violence, particularly the history of lynching, of violent racial expulsions and ethnic cleansing that's characteristic of the U.S., and for which there's never really been a record. And confronting the legacy of enslavement, confronting the legacy of legal enforced racial segregation, for which there have been no reparations, which has resulted in a vast racial inequality in wealth and income and an array of social indicators. So to promote that, the Arkansas Peace and Justice Memorial Movement, which was co-founded by Kwami, Abdul-Bey, and of which he's the co-convener, engages in a variety of participatory processes to invite members of the public to engage in this memory work, confronting both historical and present day racial injustices to try to chart a path towards a future, a more just racial future. The activities involve learning, disseminating knowledge about these incidents and past and current racial injustice, connecting, helping members of the public experience the connection between the present day circumstances and past racial injustices, revolutionizing and reforming, bringing about institutional change to try to create a more just racial future, and then enabling utopianism in two dimensions, helping people experience racial justice through participatory processes that are carefully designed, and then to engage in visioning to try to imagine what a more just racial future would look like. Next slide, please.
All right, so I'm going to provide some bigger theoretical methodological framework before turning over to Kwame. In the transitional justice field, which just to assume knowledge of term used to describe different processes through which societies deal with histories of human rights violations. There's long been a preoccupation with thinking about how these processes can be more deliberative, more inclusive, more deeply rooted in communities. What has been neglected in this literature is really exploring how these kinds of processes have manifested themselves, particularly in the global south, or sorry, global north. But even more so, there's long been a neglect of looking at how these processes are being experimented with in the United States, in particular, in addressing histories of racial violence. So the key theoretical contribution for us is for helping to draw attention to grassroots, bottom-up efforts in the United States, in particular, in the global north, more broadly. The case that you're going to hear more about is also exceptional in using multiple modes of engagement, promoting participation and engagement with this history of racial violence. And on top of that, having the explicit means of wanting to promote policy change as part of this. Next slide, please. So specifically, the two research questions that we look at in the paper are what modes of participation has APJMM used to promote this engagement with Arkansas's violent past, and in particular to promote transitional racial justice, and to further dig into what functions have these different processes help to advance. We draw upon news reports, primary documents, and testimonies from participants in our research and this exploration of this particular case. Next slide.
This has been about 7-8 years worth of work So it's kind of hard to digest it into a couple of minutes, but I'll do my best. Arkansas has a vivid documented history of racial violence, and it's there's actually a connection between Arkansas and Canada. In 1841, there was an enslaved African that escaped from Fayetteville and rode a horse all the way to Canada, and it caused an international crisis that the Canadian Parliament and the President of the United States got into it and everything, but they eventually sent the slave back because a lot of money interests with the slaveocracy got involved, and that actually put a lot of fuel into the Canadian abolitionist movement. Then shortly after that, what the legislature did is they passed a law expelling all free Black people from the state, and gave them a month to leave or be enslaved. And Arkansas is the only U.S. state that ever passed any type of law like that. Also, Arkansas has the third highest number of racialized terror lynchings, at 501 documented terror lynchings. Texas and Mississippi are the only two states that have more. And when you talk about racialized terror lynchings, for every documented one, there's at least 3 or 4 undocumented ones. So that lets you know about the expansiveness of this racialized terror lynching. And then when you talk about racial cleansing and expulsions, we already talked about that law where they expelled all of the free Blacks. Well, Arkansas has one of the highest numbers of what's called sundown towns, where someone of a darker hue, if they're caught there after the sun goes down, they're subject to particular types of heinous violence or even death. And Arkansas still has sundown towns to this day. What we've done with the APJMM is we decided that once EJI created the National Lynching Museum back in 2018, and my then wife and I visited with our children, we decided that it was important for us to continue that type of work on a statewide level, and we created APJMM, and we came back with the goal of not only doing that work of putting up these memorials for the 501 people that we know of that were lynched, but also doing a lot of more memory work. We worked with the legislature in trying to get a law passed to create a Truth and Reconciliation Commission based on the South African model. We weren't successful, but we caused a lot of conversation and a lot of dialogue. We also worked with the state government to commemorate the Elaine Race Massacre, which is the deadliest race massacre in the United States, where over 300 Arkansans were lynched. Next slide. And in doing this, the EGI model is what they do is they empower local communities to create what's called community remembrance projects. But it's not a centralized thing where they're like helping these communities do it. They basically do it on their own. So we wanted to create a model where we could empower all 75 counties in Arkansas to create their own model. We could just work as an umbrella to help them, help funnel in resources for them to do the work. And thus far, we've gotten 4 memorials put up in Fayetteville, Little Rock, North Little Rock, and Malvern. The Malvern one was just put up a couple of months ago. So we got like what, 501 minus 4. We got a lot more to do. This work is very important to myself and to Clarice, because we're both descendants of victims of racialized terror lynchings. She's a descendant of the people in the Elaine Race Massacre, and I'm a descendant of the 1927 lynching of John Carter in downtown Little Rock. Next slide, please. In doing this, as I talked earlier about, and it was mentioned by my colleagues, the importance of there being dialogue with citizens about this type of history and how this history can connect to the present. There is a nonprofit organization in the United States called Coming to America. Coming to America, no, coming to the table. Coming to the table, and Coming to the Table was actually founded by descendants of slavery, descendants of those who were enslaved and descendants of those who were enslavers. And they decided to come together to create a platform where Black, white, brown people can sit at the same table and discuss topics that have historical significance, but they also have an impact that is still relevant today when we talk about the disparities in the economic, in health, in housing, in education. And we do that in Arkansas about every 2 to 3 weeks, and we do it in a hybrid setting, since Arkansas is a big rural state. So those who can attend locally, they attend locally. We give them dinner at no cost to them. And those who cannot attend locally, they get on Zoom. And our original goal was, this was just an Arkansas thing, but it's actually become like a national, international thing, because we have people from Germany and New York and Philadelphia that get on to the Zoom and participate in these dialogues as well. One really close, recent example of what we've done, as it's written here, is the campaign for a statewide ballot measure to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in school board elections. And that came out because we unearthed knowledge that up until the late 1980s in Arkansas, it was illegal for someone to run for school board if they didn't own property. And what that did is that discounted a lot of people that were non-white to run for school board. So we actually met the woman who filed a lawsuit to get that law overturned. And as a result of that conversation, and with us, we primarily like to work with young people, because we believe if we teach these young people how to act, they'll bring the future that we all can live by. So that's one of the examples. Another thing that's come out of these dialogues is our participation with the National Day of Racial Healing. And the National Day of Racial Healing started out as something that, just a group of nonprofits would do. And it was, local, working with nonprofits. Well, we were successful in getting the previous governor of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson, to be the first U.S. governor to sign a statewide proclamation to make the National Day of Racial Healing an official day in the state of Arkansas. And once he did that, We got 6 dozen mayors, about 2 dozens public school superintendents, and a lot of county judges to sign on and issue their own proclamations. And we were doing really well with that until the current governor came into office, Sir Huckabee Sanders. So next slide, please. I'm a graduate of Little Rock Central High School, and most people around the world know the history of Little Rock Central High School. In 1957, 9 Black children tried to go to high school, and the governor sent out the National Guard and surrounded the school and said, hell no, you're not going to this school. And then the US president had to send in the military to allow these 9 students to go to school. Well, and as part of the work that we're doing, we were able to go into Central High School and actually create an avenue where the students there were given the knowledge, skills, and equipment to actually sit down with living figures of the civil rights movement and record their discussions with them and create podcasts and ask them questions about, okay, if you were alive today, what would you do? Or how can your struggle help us today? And we created a series of podcasts that are still available somewhere in the universe. I had to find them and send you the link. But that was such an empowering project there that one of the Little Rock 9, Elizabeth Eckford, after she sat down with her interview, she personally gave me a call and just talked about how it helped, that conversation with the young people helped her to relieve some of the demons that she had been living with all of these years as a result of how she was treated during the Little Rock crisis. And lastly, next slide, is another thing that we do is Clarice, she's an artist at heart, and she's always trying to find ways where we can incorporate art into this because it's such a heavy topic. So she was able to create not only a radio play on one of the lynchings, which was actually a double lynching, and work with the descendants of that double lynching. It was the lynching of 2 twins. They lynched one twin, and then the other twin asked a question, so they lynched him to stop him from asking questions about what happened to his brother. So they created this radio play. It was also performed in the theater in 2 Arkansas universities. And finally, having these discussions and at these memorial markers, the most recent one being the marker in downtown North Little Rock with Homer G. Blackwell, which actually turned out to be one of our most successful programs because it was attended by a lot of elected officials who still today are, I got a call like a couple of weeks ago from somebody saying that the Senator Jamie Scott told me to call you. I said, why did she tell me to call you? Because I saw the marker and I wanted her to ask her who did this. And so she gave them my number. And so this person was from another small city in Arkansas. And so he said, there's a lynching victim in our city. We need to put up a marker as well. So that's like an ongoing thing that makes me proud, but makes me tired at the same time because of so much work that we have to do. And I will pass it on to you.
Okay, so so what are some of the outcomes that we identified in our case study? Well, tremendous learning. Kwami detailed a lot of the lessons of the past that that have been brought into the present and made vivid and real and meaningful for present day Arkansans, especially young people in our state. Drawing connections. So through the radio play that Kwami described, through ceremonial activities like bell ringing when these plaques, memorial plaques are commemorated in public, and when descendants of lynchings and racial expulsions attend public events and engage in dialogue with other members of the community. We draw connections between the violent racial past in Arkansas and the present. Revolutionizing and reforming, enabling institutional change. There are two incidents that stand out from our case study. One, when we had a dialogue about the incident in 1859, when the Arkansas State Legislature passed legislation to legally expel all free Black people from the state of Arkansas. There was a lot of talk during the discussion, during that dialogue, of what this means for present day state and local public officials in the state, in terms of the obligations, the responsibilities of government officials today to atone for the publicity of the state in the violent past of Arkansas. And in addition, as Kwami mentioned, we had a dialogue about increasing youth participation, youth civic participation. One of the topics raised during the dialogue was whether 16 and 17-year-olds should be able to vote in school board elections, since those elections really matter to them. And the people who engaged in that dialogue got extremely excited during the event. And they kept meeting, and they kept meeting, and they kept meeting, and they decided to form a campaign to try to use the direct democracy process, which we have in our state, to enact that policy into law. So we anticipate with eagerness how that campaign goes. And then enabling utopianism in the ways that we described. So using highly structured dialogue process developed by coming to the table, facilitated by Clinton School students, our students, to create conditions of recognition and of equality and mutual respect that give the participants a quasi-utopian experience of racial justice. And then during our dialogues, it's very common for participants to engage in visioning of more just futures, and to have that be the topic of discussion, and in some instances of planning, where participants can take action to try to bring those utopian visions into these reality. So limitations, we have a number of limitations of our project. Obviously, it's a single case study using only qualitative data. I should say too that we don't have objective researchers, because all of us have been in various ways involved in the project. For example, the panel discussion, public activity of APJMM that Eric was moderator for. I helped convene the dialogues, and our students facilitate them. In terms of prompting official activities, we've had, as Kwami said, a lot of success with the National Day of Racial Healing proclamations, but state and local legislation has not been very successful. In terms of future work, we'd like to do comparative studies comparing the work of the local and state level affiliates of the Equal Justice Initiative to see what kinds of public engagement they're doing, how it varies from community to community, and what kinds of outcomes they've achieved, and then longitudinal studies to look at the long-term outcomes of these participatory processes. And now we'll have Dr. Lin Sun discuss the idea of human rights in traditional Chinese culture and the view of human rights in Chinese modernization. Dr. Sun.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much, Professor Richards. Well, hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm Lin San from Shanghai International Studies University. It is a great pleasure to have this opportunity to learn from all the distinguished scholars here. To be honest, I'm a newcomer to the field of human rights studies, My original research area was gender and African American studies. In 2023, during my visiting program at McMaster University, under the supervision of Professor Bonnie Ivova, I became deeply interested in human rights studies. And after returning to China, I joined his research team led by Professor James Gao to engage in comparative and cross-cultural studies between China and the West. So these experiences have directly contributed to the topic of my presentation today. Well, here I would like to first express my sincere gratitude to both Professor Bonnie Ivova and Professor James Gao for their guidance, and also I warmly welcome any comments and suggestions from all of you. Well, so my topic here is on the idea of human rights in traditional Chinese culture as a view of human rights in Chinese modernization. Well, first I need to point out that based on their respective political and cultural traditions, as well as national and social conditions, countries around the world have developed their own interpretations and articulations of the idea and view of human rights. In contrast to Western political and cultural tradition, the Chinese political and cultural tradition does not just emphasize an abstract notion of individual rights. Rather, it focuses on the harmonious relationships among groups in real life. And this orientation endows the Chinese idea and view of human rights with characteristics distinct from those of the West. Indeed, in China, a nation with a continuous civilization spanning 5,000 years and a large population, concern for human beings and the emphasis on, as well as protection of human rights, have been integral to its historical development from ancient times to the present. And traditional Chinese culture embodies a rich idea of human rights. Today, China has inherited the idea while grounding the idea in its national conditions and practical realities, thereby forming the view of human rights in Chinese modernization. And both the idea of human rights in traditional Chinese culture and the view of human rights in Chinese modernization, when traced to their roots, are inseparable from the profound principle of the Chinese culture ethos. So here, taking the principle as its guiding thread, my research will explore how the idea of human rights in traditional Chinese culture embodies this principle. It will also analyze how the view of human rights in Chinese modernization reflects the principle and how it integrates the idea of human rights in traditional Chinese culture to achieve innovative development. I will not only ground my analysis in Chinese historical and cultural context, as well as its current social development, but also conduct comparative studies between the cultural ethos and human rights thought of China and those of the West, with the aim of enhancing dialogue on human rights and promoting mutual learning between Chinese and Western civilizations. Well, let's first take a look at the principle of the Chinese culture ethos. If ancient Greek culture is regarded as a cradle of the Western culture ethos, then the thought of the thinkers of the Chinese spring and autumn and warring states periods constitutes the origin of the Chinese culture ethos. And those early ancient thinkers all focus on the human being, deeply reflecting on human existence, development, interpersonal relationships, the relationship between human and nature. Their ideas, interpreted with the institutions of their time and later generations, converged into the traditional Chinese culture centered on Confucianism and enriched by the teachings of like Maoism, Taoism, the legalist school, and the school of military strategy, ultimately shaping the principle of the Chinese cultural ethos, centering on Ren, benevolence, and He, harmony, which are grounded in an ethical order based on correlative thinking and the principle of collectivity. And the principle of Chinese cultural ethos has become a vital part of spiritual lineage of Chinese culture. Now, I'm going to explore the core concept here. First, 人, benevolence, is a core of Confucian thought. In its written form, the left side, you could see 人 means person, signifies the concept concerns human nature and conduct, while the right, this is character R, means two, implies that benevolence exists within the realm of human relationship and interaction. Confucius explained the meaning of 人, that the benevolent person loves others. So benevolence advocates inner self-cultivation and moral awareness, calling for a heartfelt love towards others. And this love here refers to genuine care, kindness, empathy, expressed through concrete virtues such as loyalty, righteousness, filial piety, trustworthy, fraternal respect, so as to establish an ethical order grounded in ethical relationship. For instance, within the family, respect elders and care for the young. Fathers should be kind and sons filial. In addition, this ethical order originates within the family, but is not confined to it. From a horizontal perspective, an individual should show filial respect to parents, fraternal affection to siblings, and then this love extends from one's family to a broader community. As is shown in the sayings, care for the young of my family and extend that care to the young of others. And in this way, the entire social structure is incorporated into the ethical order, fostering a spirit of universal benevolence and a sense of community that transcends blood ties. And from a vertical perspective, the entire political structure was also incorporated into this ethical order, forming a political pattern in which the state mirrored the family with a hierarchical system of families. For rulers and ministers, as well as officials and the people, all had mutual ethical obligations. For instance, the emperor was regarded as a father of the nation, while the people were to serve the emperor with filial piety. Such an ethic order integrates every individual into a network of relationships, making each other a relational being. So by loving others, one in turn receives the love from others, thereby achieving a balance in social relationship. Then let's take a look at 和. If 人 is the driving force of the principle of Chinese cultural ethos, then harmony represents its ultimate goal, embodying the Chinese ideal of harmonious relationship within the family, society, and the universe. In terms of the character component, here you can see the earliest form of the character is the oracle bone inscription here. And the left component in Chinese is pronounced yue, okay. Represents an ancient multi-piped musical instrument. Here you can see the left image, okay, consisting of bamboo pipes of varying number, length, thickness, and pitch, arranged side by side, similar to today's panpipes. And this character used music as a metaphor, vividly illustrating the essence of harmony. Different individuals cooperating according to certain rules can create a result far more beautiful than any single sound alone. And the premise of harmony is not to pursue homogeneity, but to acknowledge diversity and heterogeneity. And the right component here, 和, means crops, symbolizing livelihood and basic guarantees of survival. So together, the left and right components of this character convey that both material provision and spiritual respect are necessary to realize harmony, 和. Well, and here, the concept of harmony is reflected across the thought of various Chinese ancient thinkers. Now here I've think some of them. I just want to talk some of them, like Confucianism. It mentioned harmony in diversity, allowing individuals and groups to maintain their distinct characteristics in interaction, and also like Taoism. Here, advocates that human action should follow the laws of nature to achieve harmonious coexistence. And also like School of Military Strategy, Here, it holds that strategic principle through strategic deterrence, diplomatic means, rather than direct violence. It seeks to achieve a harmonious state. And also harmony is likewise grounded in ethic order based on correlative thinking and the principle of collectivity. It first begins within the family. So we have seen that when the family is harmonious, all undertakings prosperous, thereby achieving a social harmony. And also, harmony extends beyond the boundaries of family and state, encompasses mutual respect, peaceful coexistence among nations. So taken together, as a core of principle of Chinese cultural ethos, benevolence serves as an internal driving force pathway toward harmony, while harmony represents the external manifestation, ultimate goal of benevolence. Okay, then I will take a look at the idea of human rights in traditional Chinese culture. Well, from the thought of the ancient thinkers in China, several important ideas related to human rights can be identified. And the ideas viewed from different perspectives embody the principle of Chinese culture ethos centered on benevolence and harmony. Here I've listed 4 key points. Okay, the first one, the people are the foundation of the state. When the foundation is secure, the state is at peace. This one underscores the importance of valuing and caring for the people. From their respective theoretical perspectives, the ancient thinkers of various schools explained that the people should be the starting point for state policy and that the people's support or opposition determines national stability and the consolidation of political power. Here I've listed their specific points. These people-oriented ideas reflect the belief that the ruler's benevolence towards the people leads to harmony within the state. And the second one, uphold fairness and justice and rule by law. Confucius believes that economic inequality results in social unrest. As for how to address this issue, Confucius suggested the rulers should follow the people's needs, develop agricultural production, thereby resolving economic inequality and social instability. And also the legalist school hold that political injustice should be addressed by applying uniform punishment equally to all. So this idea emphasizes that the ruler's benevolence toward people ensures that they are treated fairly in both economic political spheres, thereby fostering social harmony and stability. Third, here, care about one's family, country, and achieve harmony among all states. While the first 2 ideas deal with obligations of the state ruling class, the collective sense of loving others, one's family, and one's country places corresponding responsibilities on ordinary people. So the people are expected to cultivate personal virtues and then extend love to others. The thinkers of various schools also developed the concept of righteousness or proper conduct from the Confucian benevolence. Acting with is essential in internal relationships and relations between states. To practice one must adhere to the principle of do not impose on others what you do not desire for yourself. So this mindset and conduct laid the foundation for harmony within families and society, as well as peaceful relations among nations. Then the fourth one, uphold unity between heaven and humanity. So here you could see Taoism, Confucianism, had certain sayings on it to promote peaceful coexistence, harmonious coexistence between man and nature, human and nature. Well, so these human rights ideals discussed above, such as loyalty to the ruler, filial piety, respect for the elderly, care for the young, care about one's family, country, were inherited and institutionalized throughout successive Chinese dynasties, and some became family precepts, others were incorporated in school curriculum and required readings for the imperial examinations, and still others were integrated into the legal system. Across all these forms, the focus constantly remained on the human being, and the idea of human rights played a positive role in safeguarding human rights in Chinese history. Now, let's take a look at the view of human rights in Chinese modernization. Well, actually, at the end of the 19th century, Western concepts of human rights were introduced into China, and confronted with imperialist aggression and exploitation of Qing government, Chinese social elites called for human rights grounded in liberty and equality. Yet neither the reform movement nor the founding of a bourgeois republic at that time was able to bring liberty equality to the Chinese people at that time. This outcome reflected both the ideological limitations of the reformers and the constraints imposed by the historical and social conditions. Then, following the achievement of national independence and the founding of the People's Republic of China, the Chinese government inherited the idea of human rights in traditional Chinese culture and integrated universal principles of human rights with Chinese specific conditions. Today, China forms a view of human rights reflecting the characteristics of Chinese modernization. While here, Chinese modernization, it refers to the modernization of a huge population, common prosperity for all, material and cultural ethic advancement, harmony between humanity and nature, and a peaceful development. Now, the following are the key points within the human rights framework of Chinese modernization, and these points deeply rooted in the principle of Chinese culture ethos centered on benevolence and harmony. First, people-centered common prosperity and shared benefits for all. Well, for this one, it carried forward the traditional emphasis on valuing and enriching people. Here, the human rights path of Chinese modernization constantly prioritizes the rights to subsistence and development as its primary and basic human rights, aiming to achieve common prosperity for China's 1.4 billion people, while and ensures equitable sharing of the benefits of social development. Now, by the end of 2020, the Chinese government has eliminated absolute poverty for its 1.4 billion people, and the country has also established the world's largest social security system. Now, due to time limit, I just listed 2 examples. And also, China adheres to green development as a means to achieve modernization characterized by harmony between humans and nature. It also reflects application of ancient Chinese human rights view of unity between heaven and humanity. At the same time, the Chinese government uses ecological governance to drive economic growth, integrating desertification control, mountain and water management, poverty elevation to create a virtuous cycle between environmental protection and economic development. Second, the integration of the rule of law with the rule of nature. Well, the idea of human rights in traditional Chinese culture incorporates the legalist approach of rule by law, but at the same time, Confucianism advocates benevolence, governance, and rule of virtue, placing ethical demands on rulers and officials. And after the founding of People's Republic of China, the country enacted the constitution, developed comprehensive laws and jurisdiction institutions to strengthen the legal protection of human rights. More importantly, the Chinese government has also combined the rule of law with the rule of virtue. So here, the rule of virtue leverages the inherent educative and guiding power of morality to lay the foundation for the rule of law. This approach from Confucian believes that if moral education is neglected and reliance is placed solely on punitive measures to punish lawbreakers, people will not regard legal violations as shameful, but merely seek to evade punishment. Therefore, the construction of the rule of virtue emphasizes moral guidance for the people, encouraging individuals to recognize their responsibilities and obligations, voluntarily choose ethic behavior, and consciously respect, study, and apply the law. Okay, and there are also some examples like the Chinese government agencies, public-private institutions prioritize virtue as a primary criterion in appointing and dismissing officials, selecting outstanding personnel, and hiring staff. Well, due to time limit, I'll just quickly finish my presentation. Okay, the second, on the other hand, the rule of law exerts the external regulative and coercive power of legal norms, reinforcing moral guidance and supporting the construction of the rule of virtue. Now here, just cite one example. Like most provinces, autonomous regions, and municipalities have enacted policies, regulations to reward, protect those who engage in righteous and courageous acts. So what can be categorized as righteous and courageous acts? For instance, actions such as stopping crimes in progress, such as theft, robbery, assault, brave deeds in the face of natural disasters or accidents, where individual risks their safety to take part in rescue efforts and safeguard the lives and property of the nation and people. They're going to get reward. Okay. Well, last but not least, I also made a comparison between the cultural ethos principles and the human rights thought of China and the West. So you can see from the analysis, the principle Chinese cultural ethos is different from that of the Western cultural ethos, which both
this presentation. So we very much appreciate your contribution to the panel. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And now we have 15 minutes of question and answer. So we'll just turn to the group of scholars. Any questions for our panel? Yes, Jessica.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Really interesting talks all day. Actually, that's amazing. Just an observation on your talk, you three, Frank, was that this kind of generative work of your organization seems really significant, like the actual physical artifacts that are being created and things like podcasts and like creative outputs of like this kind of participation. I don't even know if I have a question, but is that important in this field? Like, does that do something that other kinds of dialogue do?
I mean, certainly with respect to creating a new history or a renewed sense of history, that's having those lasting outputs is definitely very important. Finding it and accessing it is another thing. Right? It's talked about with the podcasts and studies of memorialization of violent past too also often point to challenges of, well, how do you get the public to engage or even kind of recognize these physical monuments that they're in their everyday spaces. So I guess that's a long way of saying that I think it's really important for reshaping that shared history, but at the same time, it's not a panacea.
And this history isn't written in the history books in Arkansas. So we're creating a public history. Until it's in the books, you can find it here, and there. And these are resources that teachers throughout the state actually.
Just to elaborate on those comments, one of the images that's happening, what we might recognize as proper historical Black history, accounting for these incidents of violence outside of itself, it's really only been available for the last 10 years or so. And we're living through a period right now where for the first time, this history had lived in Arkansas, but it lived within families. This was oral tradition that was carried down within among the families of the descendants of people who had suffered from racial violence in Arkansas. And now we're living in a time when that history is becoming public to the wider community and being recognized. And so I see the creation of artifacts and events as part of that broader opening, which is part of the learning, but it's also the part of the connecting of the present to the past. That's part of the big change. Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much for your presentations. We interested in the idea of human rights in the traditional Chinese culture. So I want to find out, is it this idea of human rights in the traditional culture, is it enforceable? Are there concepts that are reduced into writing in a specific document? And then how does it relate to international human rights instruments like the ICCPR, for instance? Is there a right to association, the right to privacy, the right to demonstrate in that traditional idea of human rights?
Yes, Dr. Sun.
Oh, you're muted.
Muted. She's still mute.
Dr. Sun, you just need to unmute, please.
I'm sorry that I cannot hear clearly. Would you please repeat the question?
Okay, so Mike, can you hear me now?
Can you hear? Maybe you should move.
Yeah, okay.
Oh. That's the point, yeah, so we could, yes.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, great.
Okay, so thank you very much for your presentation. So I want to find out this idea of human rights in the Chinese traditional culture. Is it reduced into writing in any specific document? Is it enforceable? And how does it relate to other international human rights instruments? So for instance, the ICCPR, which has the right to association, freedom of expression, the right to demonstrate and all that. Does this traditional human rights idea in Chinese culture, does it have those rights? Thank you.
Okay, yes. Well, we mentioned the idea of human rights in traditional Chinese culture. They appeared in different ideas, the thought of different Asian thinkers' works. Well, nowadays, for the Chinese scholars, we try to accumulate that and organize it as a systematic theory, but it may not exist presently in some documents, okay, international documents, but we borrowed that and also in like the proclamation of international human rights, one of the participants is from China. He incorporated some Confucius ideas into that document that still influenced of the human rights courses today. Yeah. Yes.
I have a question for Kate and the whole group. So I'll begin with a small comment. My name is Augusto. I'm from Brazil, and I work with. I'm going to present a work tomorrow about LGBT plus refugees, but I also work with political participation of youth, and I wanted to understand a little bit more about how the projects are done with high school students. I work in a project where we try to teach deliberative principles to children and adolescents. And we try to make it very playful. We also have a game for them to understand how to better communicate and how to better discuss or discuss more democratically. So I wanted to understand how is the method or the process of having this discussion inside the high schools. And well, for Kate, that's also some the question would be in that sense also. So for your evaluation, how you mentioned that when you have the like the foundations or the legal knowledge for the decisions, it becomes more clearly, the discussions become more effective or something. I don't know if that's the proper word. But I wonder if you also try to look at the process itself, like things like are people being respectful in these discussions? Are people being inclusive? And like other type of deliberative principles we could name. And well, for Linson, it's also something in the same way. How the traditional concept of human rights would encompass participation or political participation in a way. I don't know what's the order there.
Oh, well, first and foremost is making sure that the teachers and the superintendents are on board. That's the main way we do it. Have a lot of pizza parties. And allowing the young people to actually be co-creators in the curriculum, like several of them love spoken word poetry. So having spoken word poetry contests that connect to civic engagement and participatory democracy. They created a radio show that they have the Bad Lip Youth Talk Radio is the first youth-oriented radio talk show in the United States. And they do that every Saturday. And finally, just recently, we received a 3-year, $300,000 grant. So now we give them all stipends and they keep coming back. Okay.
Thank you. And thank you, Augusto, for these really great questions. So just going to your second questions about other aspects of deliberative democratic practice, such as inclusivity, respectful discussions. Absolutely, we monitored for that. And we found overwhelmingly that the 19 bodies that we looked at met the hallmarks of these principles that deliberative democratic institutions should follow. But I think the important conclusion for us that when you're looking at rights adjudicative deliberative bodies, that isn't enough. So those traditional hallmarks of deliberative democracy certainly aren't enough to reach a productive outcome. And that's why our conclusion, our argument would be there needs additionally to be insertion of human rights tests, especially around proportionality and non-discrimination. And this is just one thing that I didn't get a chance to speak about in the presentation. We draw on Cass Sunstein's idea of conceptual assent, and that's the idea that these legal tests, which we all know can be incredibly complicated and detailed and arcane. Our own students struggle with them. So the idea that people who don't have a legal background could sort of come in and pick them up might be a little bit unrealistic. But conceptual assent was helpful for us to explain that these legal tests can be put in non-legal language, can, for example, be almost translated to moral philosophy or ethics. We don't need to be using legal terms when we're instructing participants in these deliberative democratic institutions to engage in human rights deliberation. Augusto, I don't know if you also wanted to ask me the question about high schools as well. Sorry, there was a bit of confusion about that, but I'm also quite aware that the panel's coming to an end. So, and there was also another question for Lin Su.
Thank you, Dr. Sun.
Oh, please unmute.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Can I guess a question? Sorry for that.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
My question
yes.
was how this traditional concept of human rights incorporate participation, political participation.
Well, I should say that in ancient times, the political participation mostly come from the top to the bottom. So normally, like I mentioned that the ancient rulers, they placed people as centered. So they are gonna actually make some policies that to enrich people, benefit people. Then they are gonna encourage people to engage in that. So that's a way in ancient times that for the political participation. Yes. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentations. My name is Sadi. My question is firstly for Professor Kate. You made mention of the app that was used to trace the people with COVID or who had contact. Now my question is, and then actually in your presentation you highlighted the effectiveness of the app. So what I wanted to check is whether there were any unintended consequences, and if there were, what were their impact on the rights of individuals. And then following that one, I also want to check if there were any ethical considerations to protect the information or the data that was gathered by the contact tracers from those who made contact with people with COVID.
And Kate, we have 1 minute left, so if you would mind responding to one portion of that concisely.
Okay. To the second part of the question, the protection of data was absolutely an issue that was addressed in the workshop. And that goes again to the point of, it's I think well proven now that the participants in these deliberative democratic fora are able to handle very technical information with expert instruction. Your point about unintended consequences. So this was just dealing with the legislation. So the legislation before the app was even introduced. But your question is a really good one because it goes to the point of rights adjudicative bodies are only ever a moment in time. And I think your question really goes to the issue of whether these deliberative bodies should actually be more continuous or reconvene at different points in time. So they could make a recommendation, for example, to legislatures, but maybe they have to convene every, 1-2 years, depending on the situation, to determine whether their original recommendations need to be tapered in any way.
And thank you all very much for coming, and please join me in thanking the